Hello and welcome to Rain's Kitchen and Garden. My name is Rain. Today I'm making Italian focaccia bread and I'm flavoring it with onions. This is part of my bread baking series where I'm baking every one of the 40 recipes from the Williams-Sonoma Collection recipe cookbook titled Bread. I hope you enjoy it, and please don't forget to check out my bread playlist for other delicious bread making videos. All right, let's make some focaccia bread. In my bowl here, I have some warm water. I have a half a cup, that's 125 mils, and the warm water is at 105 to 115 Fahrenheit or 40 to 46 Celsius. And I have my entire portion of brown sugar here. It's a tablespoon or 15 grams, and I'm just going to take a pinch of it and sprinkle it into my warm water. And now I'm going to sprinkle in my active dry yeast. I have a tablespoon or 10 grams. And you want to sprinkle it, don't just plop it in. Because if you plop it in, what happens is it clumps up. And it's harder to dissolve it. And if you don't get it all nice and dissolved, nobody wants to bite into a clump of yeast. So I just have a fork and I'm going to mix that up a little. Okay, I've got some cling film here and I'm going to cover my bowl and let it sit for about 10 minutes until it's nice and foamy. And the reason we do this is to test our yeast to make sure it's good. If after 10 minutes you don't have a nice foam, then your yeast may not be good. Let's check our yeast. It's been about 8 minutes for me, and that is definitely nice and foamy. Let me show you here. See how foamy that is? So my yeast is absolutely fine. So now to my bowl, I'm going to add 1 cup of water. That's 250 mils, and it was also heated to 105 to 115 Fahrenheit or 40 to 46 Celsius. I'm going to add the rest of my brown sugar. I also have a 1/4 cup of extra light olive oil. That's 62 mils. 62 mils approximately. I have some table salt here, 1.5 teaspoons or 12 grams. Let's add all that together. And I'm just gonna give that a little stir. Okay, the next ingredient I'm going to add is bread flour. Now in my bowl here on the side, I have my full portion of bread flour. That's 4.5 cups or 670 grams. And to this mixture, I'm going to add just 1 cup. As my cat meows in the background. And I'm going to mix this with my spatula until it's nice and creamy. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch to my whisk because there are some lumps of flour in there and I don't want lumps in my dough. So I'm going to whisk that up till it's nice and creamy. Okay, that's nice and creamy. I'm going to stick with my whisk as long as I can. Now what I'm doing now is I'm adding another cup of the bread flour. We're doing this a little bit at a time. And I'm going to use my whisk and whisk that all together. Now it's getting just a little too thick for my whisk, so now I'm going to switch to my spatula. That's nicely combined. I'm going to start adding the rest of my flour, half a cup at a time, and mix with my spatula. It's getting a little bit too hard for me to mix with the spatula, so I'm going to turn it out onto my counter. First, I'm going to just pour out the rest of the flour. I'm going to have to incorporate the rest by hand. And if you have a kitchen mixer, more power to ya. I still have that on my wish list. Let me just get all of the ingredients out of here. And I will start mixing that all by hand. I'm not trying to knead it. I just want to incorporate it. Now what I'm going to do is just kind of flatten it out a little bit, and I'm going to grab my onions. I have a half a cup of chopped yellow onions here. That's about 60 grams. And I'm going to just do a quick little kneading to incorporate all the onions. I want to try to make sure the onions get incorporated into the dough very evenly so that we don't have a big pocket of onions on one side and nothing on the other. Now the dough is going to be sticky. That's how it's supposed to be. There we go. Very sticky. I had an onion fly out. Let me just fold it a couple of times here. All right. So what I've done is I've put the dough back into the bowl, and I'm going to cover it with a little bit of cling film very loosely, and with my well-used tea towel. And I'm going to let that sit and rest for 20 minutes. I have here a 9 by 13 inch pan that's 22 by 33 centimeters, and I'm going to pour a little bit of that extra light tasting olive oil into my pan. Just distribute that really well. Okay, and I do have a little bit of olive oil in a dish here that I'm keeping handy. And after 20 minutes, my dough has risen a little bit, and I'm going to pour that into my pan. Oh boy, that smells good with the onions. It's very heavy dough. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with oiled fingers, I'm going to press down the dough so that it flattens out to the shape of the pan. I'm using oiled fingers because I don't want it to stick on me. It's a very sticky dough. I made a what's called a pour in the pan pizza video last year, I think. And it was kind of the same idea as this. It was focaccia bread, as the pizza dough, and it was so good and crunchy. Because you're basically baking it in oil, aren't you? So it gets nice and crunchy on the bottom. All right. If it's too hard for you to press and flatten it out to the size of the pan, then what you can do is just cover it up and wait another 10 minutes and try again. You know, sometimes you're rolling out your dough or you're pressing it down and then it starts shrinking back in. Then it's not ready to be rolled out or pressed yet. You have to let it rest a little longer. All right, it's very oily. I'm just going to push in some of those onions that kind of popped out. And if there's some that are kind of right near the edge of the pan, I'm just going to pull them and stick them somewhere else, because I don't want them to burn in the oil when I'm going to bake this later. So this is pretty evenly distributed and distributed and flattened out. I'm going to cover it now with some cling film. I've brushed my cling film with a little bit of oil, just so it doesn't stick when the dough starts to rise. Now I'm going to put that in a nice warm spot for an hour until it doubles in bulk, and that's probably going to be my oven with the light on. All right, let's check on our dough here. It has definitely doubled in size. I'm going to hold on to that cling film because I'm going to use it again in a minute. But right now what I'm going to do is create dimples in the dough. Now I've got my bowl of olive oil here, and I'm going to do that again with oiled fingers. Now to make the dimple, you're going to oil your fingers and push your fingertips down to the bottom of the pan. And just make sure you oil your fingertips after each dimpling so that you don't deflate the dough too much, okay? So let's make some dimples here. A little crooked dimple. It does deflate the dough though. There we go. Make a few more here. My fingers are very, very oily, so I don't have to worry too much about re-dipping them at the moment. There we go. Just gonna push some of those onions back in. And what I'm going to do is I have about just under 1/4 cup of that extra light tasting olive oil. That's about 62 mils. I'm just going to drizzle that again over the focaccia. There's a lot of oil in this. About 1/2 cup in total, I would say. There we go. And I will just clean that up a bit. There's some oil on the side of the pan. If you have any oil on your pan, be careful because it will burn once you put it in the oven. We can clean it up right before we put it in, but I'm going to cover that with my cling film again and just let that rest for about 1/2 hour while I preheat my oven. I've actually already preheated my oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. That is 220 Celsius or gas mark 7. If you have a pizza stone, keep that in your oven because it will help with the heat. Now just a little note on ovens. I know my oven very well. Just because it beeps doesn't mean it's necessarily hot enough to reach 425. I have a little oven thermometer in there because my oven fluctuates a lot. It's a very old oven. So I suggest that you let it heat up for a good half hour to 45 minutes before you use it for anything. That's just my suggestion. So we'll be back in a half an hour to put it in the oven. All right, now it's time to prepare the focaccia bread for the oven. Ooh, there's so much oil. What I'm going to do is, I've got some coarse salt here. I'm just sprinkling on some coarse salt onto the top of the focaccia. Not a crazy amount, but I just want to make sure that it's sprinkled all over. Maybe I've got a couple of pinches, 2 or 3 pinches of salt. Now, maybe 4. 4 little pinches of salt. Okay, that's enough rain. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure there's no oil on the side of the pan. Like I said before, it will burn. There we go. Now, for the focaccia, this is so versatile. You don't have to make it the way I made it. You can take the basic recipe. You don't have to put onions in it. You could make it plain like I did for my pour in the pan pizza, and I will put the link in the description below and in the cards above for that. You could put garlic in it. You could, instead of putting salt on top, you could put a mix of herbs. Rosemary, fresh rosemary is a very popular choice for focaccia bread. You could do a mix of rosemary, sage, basil, and oregano. You could work in some olives, green, black, or Kalamata olives into the dough, like I did with the onions. You could top it with sun-dried tomatoes, and if you want to put some cheese on top, you could use Parmesan, you could use goat cheese or blue cheese. It's really, really versatile and very delicious. So I'm going to put this in my oven for 20 to 25 minutes until it's golden brown. And I'm going to actually take a spatula and check underneath when I take it out at the 20-minute mark, because I want the bottom of the dough to be a nice dark brown. So here it goes into the oven. Look at this delicious focaccia bread, my friends. Ooh, look at it. It's got such a beautiful brown color. It smells divine. Oh my goodness, I can't wait to just dive right into this. Now, I'm just going to be careful here and kind of go around the sides, because when you're using oil, sometimes it can be very sticky. Okay, so be prepared for that. That's why we use a lot of oil. And when you take your focaccia out of the pan, take it out right away. Don't let it sit in the pan for a while, because it can get even stickier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer this onto a wire rack, and I'm going to let this cool absolutely completely before I cut into it. I just want to show you, my friends, what it looks like underneath. See how nice and dark it is? Oh, it's slipping. Let me see if I can lift it for you. It's nice and dark underneath, so it's going to be really, really crispy. Well, my focaccia bread has cooled, and now I'm going to cut a slice. I'm going to cut from the end because I really want that crunch. Oh, that looks great. Look at that on the inside. It's hard to see, but the onions are there. This is going to be really, really good. Let me see if I can taste a piece of this here. Let's see about that crunch. That is spectacular. It has the perfect amount of salt. That onion flavor is amazing. Oh, I am so pleased with this. It's such a beautiful loaf. And it's got a nice crunch. And the inside is nice and fluffy. I'm very happy with this recipe. I hope that you enjoyed this video, my friends. And please like and subscribe if you did. leave me a comment because I love to read them and I do reply to all of them. Let me know if you make this bread. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!